Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 10 tight end and quarterback rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're covering all topics related to the tight end and quarterback position, beginning with matchups. We'll talk about which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing tight ends and quarterbacks thus far this season on average, in order to give ourselves some more insight as to who has the most upside going into this upcoming week and who has the most advantageous matchups. Now, after, of course, we talk about matchups at each respective positions, we'll go ahead and transition to our top 16 quarterback and tight end rankings in order to give you guys my perspective and opinions as to how I think these positions are going to stack up when all is said and done by the end of Week 10. I want to thank you guys for continuing to support the channel. Of course, if you guys have not yet already subscribed, we're making fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2021 season going into the NFL playoffs. Of course, whether it is rankings throughout the week, we have the strength of schedule video coming out tomorrow. We'll have a live stream after tonight's Thursday night game. Typically, the live stream starts around 8:30 Pacific Standard Time p.m. So as soon as the game's over, I'll be here answering questions for those of you who need help going into your Week 10 matchups. Of course, we have Sunday morning live streams, all of the above. So subscribe if you have not yet already. Of course, check out Underdog Fantasy. There's a link down in the description of the video for those of you who are trying to play the weekly contest, whether it is the Thursday night, contest between the Miami Dolphins and Ravens, in which you can go draft a team of 4 players and compete against thousands of other fantasy players to, of course, win yourself some hard-earned cash. Outside of that, of course, there's the Pick'ems lineups in which you can go ahead, pick over/under on players. If you guys have not yet already, check that out with the link down in the description. If you guys want to sign up, use promo code Andrew. Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. Extremely generous offer for those of you trying to get started and, of course, win some money. Thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead and begin by talking about the tight end position. But first and foremost, let's talk about rankings. So the nearest stats right here, this column where it says 2021 tight end fantasy points allowed. Let's talk about who's giving up the most points to opposing tight ends thus far this season on average in a half PPR scoring format. Of course, first and foremost, the Philadelphia Eagles have been the worst team as of late, mainly because they just came off of a week in which they gave 3 tight ends more than 8 fantasy points each from the Los Angeles Chargers. I mean, we even saw the third string tight end, Anderson, for the Los Angeles Chargers have himself an incredible game. So overall, yes, that defense cannot stop opposing tight ends, but neither can the Baltimore Ravens, Houston Texans, Las Vegas Raiders, or Indianapolis Colts. Let's keep in mind, a team like the Houston Texans, along with the New York Giants, Chicago Bears, and of course, Cincinnati Bengals, they are all on bye week 6 weeks, so we will not be able to take advantage of those respective matchups. But just wanted to go ahead first and foremost, show you guys who has the most advantageous matchups going into the week based on average fantasy points scored in a half PPR scoring format. And of course, talk about the worst matchups where you don't really want to start tight ends against the New England Patriots. So whether that is David Njoku, Austin Hooper, that is going to be a tougher task. We know that the Arizona Cardinals, they've typically locked down every single tight end. The only one that has actually played well against them this year has been Kittle from last week. Outside of that, the Carolina Panthers don't even have that good of a tight end, so nothing to worry about there. Dallas Goedert taking on the Broncos could be, a little bit of a concern. We'll keep an eye on that. But either way, just wanted to go ahead and show you these statistics. I will be referring back to them as we progress throughout the video. We'll, of course, talk about the quarterback matchups going into the quarterback rankings after we finish talking about the tight end position, but just want to go ahead and let you know that. All right, let's go ahead and transition. Let's begin with our top 16 tight end rankings on the week. Do not forget, rankings are subject to change. Like I always say, there are a multitude of things that are happening throughout the week, whether it is players missing, players getting injured, and whether it's defenders getting injured and missing in a specific week. That can affect a overall player's ranking. So we will be mentioning players here. Many will be missing because we don't know their overall status for this upcoming week, but hopefully this will give you some insight and help you out this upcoming week. Beginning with our number 1, we have Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. I understand Travis Kelce hasn't had the best season, especially considering he's coming off of a performance in 2020 in which he had 260 fantasy points. The guy was putting up 15 plus points a week for the last 10 games of the season there. He obviously hasn't met that standard thus far this season, but I'm honestly not too worried about it. Even with Patrick Mahomes struggling, Travis Kelce's coming off of a 15-point fantasy week. He takes on the Las Vegas Raiders that are giving up the 4th most points to opposing tight ends thus far this season. And specifically, the Las Vegas Raiders, they've given up 5 receiving touchdowns to opposing tight ends in the last 5 games already. Now, when we talk about Travis Kelce and how successful he's been against the Las Vegas Raiders organization, since Patrick Mahomes has taken the starting role in 2018, the last 6 games that Travis Kelce's played against the Raiders, these are his stat lines. 8 catches, 127 and a touchdown. 8 catches, 108 and a touchdown. 5 catches for 90. 7 catches for 107 and a touchdown. 5 catches for 62. And then 12 catches for 168 and 2 touchdowns. He has been unstoppable against this defense. They will have a very difficult time bottling him up. I think Travis Kelce, of course, is our number 1. Moving on to George Kittle. George Kittle played against the Los Angeles Rams. George Kittle had an amazing week despite being actually kind of limited in his overall exposure to opportunity. Sure, he got himself 8 targets, which is extremely promising considering his total snap count. So when he's on the field, Jimmy Garoppolo's looking in his direction. That's exactly what we want to see, especially coming off of a week in which it wasn't the best matchup. You're playing against the Arizona Cardinals and you produce that well. Now you get a very advantageous matchup against the Los Angeles Rams team that are giving up the 11th most points. And by all accounts, George Kittle feasts against the Los Angeles Rams. In the last 6 games that he's played against them, my goodness, has he gone off. 7 catches, 109 and a touchdown. 5 catches, 57 and a touchdown. 8 catches for 103. 9 catches for 149 and a touchdown. 5 catches for 98 and a touchdown. 4 catches for 100. Dude, these tight ends are going to ball out this week. I'm all in on these guys. They're going to have a fantastic game. The Los Angeles Rams have given up 2 receiving touchdowns to tight ends in the last 2 weeks. I think George Kittle, obviously, our number 2 for this week. Moving on to Darren Waller. Now, of course, Darren Waller had himself a good game. Finally, for only the second time this season, he has surpassed 11 targets this last week. 11 targets, 7 receptions, 92 yards for 12.7 fantasy points. Fantastic. We love to see that. Hopefully, that will continue to persist. Now, this upcoming week, they take on the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs are giving up the 6th most points. Luckily for all of us, the best tight ends have the best matchups this week, and it's continuing to pile on. Of course, besides the fact that he takes on Kansas City. Now, not to forget that the Kansas City Chiefs have also given up 6 receiving touchdowns to opposing tight ends in just the last 6 games alone. Now, when we talk about what Darren Waller's done against this division rival, I mean, here comes some more stats, guys. 7 catches, 88 and a touchdown. 5 catches, 48 and a touchdown. 7 catches for 100, 6 catches for 63. He's dominated against his defense on a consistent basis throughout the last 2 seasons of his career, and I think that's going to continue as we see him being the number 1 receiving option of this Las Vegas Raiders offense and continuing to unlock his potential. He's our number 3. Mark Andrews is our number 4. He plays later tonight. Obviously, you guys are starting him. It's no question to be asked there. He's coming off a week in which he had 10 targets, 5 catches, 44 yards. Now, I want to go ahead and mention first and foremost, only 3 times in Mark Andrews' career has he ever had 10 targets. 2 of those times have come just most recently this season. He's getting more exposure to opportunity. He's getting the targets that are going to continue to not only kind of fill his baseline and floor, but will give him more upside as we continue. He takes on the Miami Dolphins, giving up the 13th most points to opposing tight ends. I think Mark Andrews is an incredible play. I mean, last time he took on the Miami Dolphins, week 1 of 2019, had himself 2 receiving touchdowns in a monster game, and that's when it all began for the Ravens and, of course, Lamar Jackson. But either way, number 4, Mark Andrews. I'm very excited for his potential tonight. A great play overall. We're moving on to Mike Gesicki, another player for tonight's game. Luckily for Gesicki, he has the privilege of playing against a very easy matchup. And many of you may be thinking, well, he's going to have Jacoby Brissett, Andrew. Is it really trustworthy enough to go ahead and start him? Absolutely. With Jacoby Brissett this season, in the 4 games in which Jacoby Brissett has started, Mike Gesicki's averaged about 8.25 targets per game in those contests. So overall, he's getting the ample opportunity. He plays against a team that has given up the 2nd most points to tight ends. Of course, we've seen Tyler Conklin this last week only had himself 7 points. Uzama the week before went for over 20 points. Jared Cook and Noah Fant just recently went for over 10 points a pop against that defense as they both scored touchdowns. There's a lot of potential to be had. Mike Gesicki, I know he's been a solid tight end. I mean, he really has. He's been in this top 5 conversation, so why not once again start him up in a great matchup? We're moving on to Kyle Pitts. Now, besides the fact that Kyle Pitts finished with 3 catches for 62 yards, I know that may seem underwhelming, but let's not forget, in the beginning of that game, on the first drive, he dropped a 40-yard, grab. And who knows, maybe that reception could have led to even more than 40 yards. He breaks a tackle, goes for a touchdown, and then the rest is history. But either way, they're continuing to get him utilized. They're continuing to go ahead and send him the ball. And really, he's become a wide receiver. He's not really a tight end per se, but he's going to be a tight end for us. He's playing about 48% of his snaps in the slot position, playing about 33% out wide, and then playing the rest of the 19% in the inline. So, of course, he's seeing corner coverage. He's seeing slot corner coverage. Sometimes he plays against linebackers, and when he does, he torches them, finds a lot of separation in doing so. But either way, he's purely been a wide receiver. Luckily for him, he plays against the Dallas Cowboys, and their cornerbacks have not been able to cover anybody in the slot for quite some time. I mean, Jerry Jeudy just had himself a monster week against that Dallas Cowboys, slot corner. I mean, Jerry Jeudy plays predominantly about 70% of his snaps from the slot position. He was able to get himself a good amount of yardage. I think there's a great spot for him this week. With no Calvin Ridley in the lineup, once again, Kyle Pitts is a great play. Moving on to TJ Hockenson coming off of the bye week. In the last 3 weeks alone, that, of course, TJ Hockenson has played, of course, he's had 31 total targets. That is an unbelievable statistic. Takes on the Pittsburgh Steelers, and though they are only giving up the 19th most points, we have to kind of put it in perspective. In the last couple weeks, the Pittsburgh Steelers have been terrible against opposing tight ends. Specifically, Cole Kmet this last Monday night, of course, 6 catches for 87 yards. Jimmy Graham dropped a touchdown, and it also had a touchdown called back on a very bogus call, in my opinion. Could have had himself 2 touchdowns there. The tight end position was definitely utilized in order to beat that Pittsburgh Steelers defense. And even the week prior, of course, the Cleveland Browns were able to do it as their 3 tight ends combined for 9 catches for 98 yards. There's a lot of potential and high upside this upcoming week for TJ Hockenson. The last time we saw him play was against Philadelphia, 10 catches for 89 yards. Overall, an awesome play this upcoming week and should be fantastic for us. Moving on to Pat Freiermuth. Again, I mean, he has just been on fire. He's been beyond just a solid tight end. And the fact that he's a rookie just makes it that much sweeter because he's a guy that you could have picked up off the waivers and are benefiting from. Plays against Detroit. They haven't given up many points to tight ends, but of course, recently 6 catches for 72 yards for Dallas Goedert in a game in which they completely blew out the Detroit Lions defense. Either way, the stat that I wanted to first and foremost present was, besides the fact that he has seen, 7, and 6 targets in the last 3 weeks alone, and on top of the fact that he has 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games, Big Ben Roethlisberger hasn't thrown a touchdown to a wide receiver on his team since week 5 against Denver. They have literally just thrown the ball out of the backfield to Najee Harris, who scored a touchdown, and of course, Pat Freiermuth. Those are the only guys that have scored receiving touchdowns as of late. This offense is predicated about getting Pat Freiermuth the ball when they're down in the red zone. That is going to continue to be the case as Big Ben isn't really letting it, air out per se. Pat Freiermuth, a fantastic play coming off an 18-point fantasy performance as our number 8. Moving on to Dalton Schultz. Now, of course, I mentioned this last week. With Blake Jarwin going to the injured reserve, it does give Dalton Schultz more and more opportunity. And if in fact he's going to get more targets, then that's going to be fantastic for him because that is really what has separated him in the early half of this season, the targets that he has continued to garner in this respective offense. As he takes on the Atlanta Falcons, giving up the 17th most points to opposing tight ends. Really, as of late, the only good performance that Atlanta's given up to a tight end was Mike Gesicki. 7 catches for 85 yards and a touchdown. Outside of that, really, we haven't seen much. The reason why I am so confident with Dalton Schultz is because we know he has a solidified position within this offense and this scheme. They run a lot of 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receiver sets, and that's what they've pretty much done all season long. Really, unless they bring in a second back with Tony Pollard and try to mix it up, there's always going to be a tight end on the field regardless. So, Dalton Schultz, he's a reliable tight end. He has been reliable all season long. Going to continue to do so with touchdown upside. Dawson Knox is our number 10. For those of you who have been holding on to Dawson Knox, luckily, he has practiced 2 days in a row, and he should be back to play against the New York Jets, giving up the 8th most points to tight ends. Just wanted to mention, in the last couple weeks, the Indianapolis Colts had 3 receptions, 56 yards, and a touchdown from their tight ends. The New England Patriots, the week prior, 4 catches, 75, and a touchdown. The Atlanta Falcons, 3 tight ends combined for 16 catches, 189, and 2 touchdowns against the New York Jets defense. They've given up a bunch of points to tight ends, and I don't think it's going to stop going into this upcoming week as Josh Allen is going to get his safety blanket back. A tight end who had himself 5 receiving touchdowns in 4 games. Obviously, the last game that he played against the Tennessee Titans, he broke his hand. He was still able to complete a 2-point conversion pass with that broken hand. Nonetheless, I think it's a great opportunity, extremely high upside in terms of touchdown production for a player like Dawson Knox. We know he's going to be immediately utilized once he's back in the lineup. That is why he sits at our number 10. Moving on to Noah Fant, coming off his 1-week stint of the injured reserve. So now he plays against the Philadelphia Eagles. He's got the best matchup of the week, Albert Okwuegbunam, his backup tight end. He's dealing with an injury. And let's just talk about what Philadelphia has given up this season. They have allowed 8 receiving touchdowns to opposing tight ends this season already. On top of it, last week, the Los Angeles Chargers trio of tight ends, 11 catches, 126 yards, 2 touchdowns. Hockenson the week prior had 10 catches, 89. Foster Moreau, 6 catches for 60 and a touchdown. O.J. Howard, 6 catches, 49 and a touchdown. Noah Fant, a fantastic play. Hopefully, he's fully healthy and ready to go for this upcoming week. We have Dallas Goedert as our number 12 in the back end of this tight end 1 conversation. Dallas Goedert has a very difficult matchup against the Denver Broncos, but the reason why I have him as low as I do isn't because he is not getting targets. Sure, he's gotten 6 targets, and based on how many passes Jalen Hurts threw last week, 17 total attempts, he's seeing about 35% of the target share overall. But the issue is it's not enough. That is the problem. If he's not going to be in an offense that is heavily utilizing the tight end position and getting them, opportunities in the red zone in comparison to all these other players, he's going to be left behind, despite the fact he played 93% of the offensive snaps. That's the second time he's done that in the last 3 games. I think there's a lot that, is left wanted from the performances of a Dallas Goedert, and hopefully Jalen Hurts can unlock that this upcoming week in garbage time. Dan Arnold's our number 13. The beginning of this, streaming option tight end, players here. We have Dan Arnold taking on Indianapolis, giving up the 5th most points to tight ends. Of course, Dan Arnold has been consistent for 3 consecutive weeks in terms of targets and his overall productivity. Especially in a full PPR, he's far more valuable as he hasn't scored a touchdown for the Jaguars this season. But as of late, the New York Jets had themselves 8 catches, 82 yards, and a touchdown from their respective tight ends. Tennessee the week before, 753 and a touchdown. And then we know Mark Andrews had himself a 36.2 point fantasy point performance against them. Just an unbelievable game. Dan Arnold in a pretty good spot. Hunter Henry, we know he's a touchdown monster, and that is all we are hoping for. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he puts up 3 points. Otherwise, he has scored 5 touchdowns in the last 6 games. Let's hope he continues to pile that on as we progress as our number 14. Number 15 is Tyler Conklin. He's been solid in the idea that he's putting up 7 to 8 fantasy points every single week as of the last 3 games. If that continues to persist, and maybe he can accompany that with a lucky touchdown, then sure, he gets to the double-digit points. Otherwise, a solid, reliable tight end that is getting targets that really, across the entire fantasy landscape, we don't see often. Moving on to our final tight end option, we have Jared Cook. Again, Jared Cook, he's one of these options that, yes, may get a touchdown stolen from Darnell Parham or maybe the other tight end, and they still have Mike Williams there, who should have himself a fantastic week. But Jared Cook will always have the possibility of coming out of nowhere, not only getting the yardage, but getting that sneaky touchdown and finishing as a number 16 tight end. All right, now that we've covered this, we can go ahead and transition to the quarterback position. Let's go ahead and begin by talking about matchups. On the very left side of the screen, we have 2021 quarterback fantasy points allowed. Talking about exactly how many points defenses are giving up on a weekly basis on average in a 4-point per passing touchdown format to opposing quarterbacks. We have, of course, the Washington football team coming off of a bye week, but they have given up a bunch of points to quarterbacks. The Kansas City Chiefs, though they had the privilege of taking on a rookie quarterback, I was considering him a rookie quarterback because he didn't have any snaps in his first season. Jordan Love last week. Still, they're giving up a ton of points. The Indianapolis Colts, 49ers, Atlanta Falcons, Cowboys. These are defenses that can be exposed and are exposed typically on a weekly basis. On the other end of this spectrum, of course, Buffalo, Denver, Arizona, the Los Angeles Chargers, the New England Patriots. These have been defenses that have been able to at least either siphon or kind of push all the fantasy value away from the quarterback position and let running backs score on them, or maybe not even let anybody score on them like the Buffalo Bills have all season long. Either way, just kind of putting this in perspective, we'll refer back to these statistics as we progress through the video, but a lot of these quarterbacks are automatic starts and you really won't have to think about them. But either way, let's go ahead and let's start talking about our top 16 rankings. Of course, are subject to change. We begin with our number 1, Lamar Jackson. Now, a couple stats that I wanted to mention. Obviously, he's coming off an incredible fantasy point performance. 3 passing touchdowns, 120 rushing yards on 21 carries for 30.64 fantasy points in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. Obviously unbelievable. But a couple stats that I wanted to first and foremost mention. Now, he's number 2 amongst all quarterbacks in fantasy points per game with 24.5. That is an unbelievable number. Those are almost close to the numbers in which he was posting in his MVP season. Either way, he already has 600 rushing yards this year already. That's more rushing yards than Alvin Kamara, Najee Harris, Aaron Jones, Austin Eckler, etc. There's a bunch of guys that he has already surpassed. And he's going to continue to probably keep pace with or be above them. He takes on a very easy matchup, giving up the 7th most points. The Miami Dolphins are not a good defense. And though they were able to shut down Tyrod Taylor just is a different category in comparison to Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is he's one of one. And he's obviously going to have a great game. The last time he took on the Miami Dolphins defense, Week 1, 2019, had himself 5 passing touchdowns. And I'm sure Miami's still haunted by the fact that that occurred. Either way, Lamar, obviously a fantastic play. Continue to be consistent all season long. We're moving on to Tom Brady. Now, I didn't mention that Lamar has the 2nd highest fantasy point per game average this season in a 4-point per passing touchdown league. And you want to guess who's number 1? Yes, that is correct, guys. It is Tom Brady. I mean, the fact that Tom Brady currently has himself 25 passing touchdowns, 26 total touchdowns, is the number 1 overall quarterback in fantasy, also considering the fact that he's coming off of a bye week. He plays against the easiest matchup of the week, the Washington football team, giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks. They've given up 22 total touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks within 8 games. So already it's almost about 3 touchdowns per game going to opposing quarterbacks. And when we're talking about Tom Brady, in the last 2 games, we saw him 4 passing touchdowns apiece in those games. Of course, he's going to have himself an incredible game, regardless of whether Gronk or AB are there. Evans, Godwin, Fournette, they'll get it done for him this week. Moving on to Josh Allen, our number 3. Josh Allen takes on the New York Jets, and though his history against the New York Jets hasn't been great, he hasn't had the most, outstanding performances per se, but hopefully brutal loss that they took against the Jacksonville Jaguars last week is going to wake them up. The fact that they only scored 6 points, I mean, that is just embarrassing, especially considering you're playing against the Jaguars of all teams. If you're a Jaguars fan, by all means, listen, your guys are in the rebuilding process, okay? Don't take it the wrong way, but you understand what I mean. It's the Buffalo Bills. They're supposed to be a Super Bowl contender, but nonetheless, when we think about the potential of Josh Allen this week, I love the idea of Dawson Knox coming back. I think, of course, this defense for the New York Jets, they've given up the most points to opposing running backs. I don't even think they're going to run the ball outside of Josh Allen running the ball. I think it might be one of those weeks where he's going to try to come out and put up 35 points on the board in the first quarter. And if that's going to hopefully be the case, then Josh Allen will, of course, be piling it up. He's currently number 3 in total fantasy points per game at the quarterback position, and hopefully he'll continue to persist in that direction and wake up a little bit this week. We have Dak Prescott as our number 4. Despite the fact that Dak Prescott and the entire Dallas Cowboys offense disappeared in the first half of that game, he was able to pull out a clutch garbage time performance, which we typically saw in 2020 from Dak Prescott in those shootouts early in the season. But luckily, 2 passing touchdowns, got himself some 2-point conversions, and overall, the fantasy points were solidified. Now that you go into a week against the Falcons, I mean, the Falcons last season, you guys remember that game. That was quite the shootout between those two teams. Falcons are, of course, giving up the 5th most points to opposing quarterbacks this season. I mean, of course, as of late, Trevor Siemian, 249 yards, 2 touchdowns, with all those drops that his receivers had last week. Tua went for 291 and 4 touchdowns, while Heineke went for 290 and 3 touchdowns. If you're telling me that those 3 backup quarterbacks, I know Tua is a starter, I get it, but I mean, he's been hurt so much, he might as well be the backup at this point. If you're telling me those 3 quarterbacks are able to put up those kind of numbers against Atlanta, I can only wait to see what Dak Prescott will be capable of doing this upcoming week as our number 4. Number 5 is Matthew Stafford. And yes, the incredible news of Odell Beckham Jr. going to the Los Angeles Rams does help me and makes me excited about our chances as a Los Angeles Rams fan. But it doesn't, mean anything this week. He probably won't play until next week. And even then, he probably won't have a full role for a little while until he learns that offense. Nonetheless, Matthew Stafford takes on the San Francisco 49ers, giving up the 4th most points to opposing quarterbacks. They have allowed 16 total touchdowns from quarterbacks this season, so about 2 per game is going to probably be guaranteed here. Of course, Colt McCoy only had himself 1 touchdown last week with 249 yards, and James Conner getting the rest done on the ground. Either way, I think of Matthew Stafford's performance on last Sunday night. The Tennessee Titans defensive line got all over him. And if there's going to be a situation in which the 49ers pass rush is going to get after him, then I'm going to be thinking, do we have Jared Goff at the quarterback position again? Because that's what it looked like last week. Hopefully that won't be the case. Hopefully we'll get back to going ahead and scoring a bunch of points against this mediocre defense, to say the very least, in terms of giving up points this season. I think Matthew Stafford's in a good position, but it's going to have to prove it because Kyle Shanahan certainly does have the Rams number in the last couple years. Moving on to Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert had one of those completion percentage games that we've only just, sometimes seen from Phillip Rivers. And, I have to always compare Justin Herbert to Phillip Rivers in my mind because, again, Phillip was there for so long and I watched so many Chargers games over the years. But either way, takes on the Minnesota Vikings, the 15th easiest matchup at the quarterback position. Lamar Jackson was able to score 3 touchdowns, run for 120, send that thing to overtime, win the game with Justin Tucker. Cooper Rush the week prior, 325 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Of course, Justin Herbert's coming off a game in which he was 32 for 38 passing against, honestly, a solid secondary for the Philadelphia Eagles. That's an 84.2% passing completion percentage. 2 passing touchdowns, 356 passing yards, 1 rushing touchdown. Overall, an incredible week. Hopefully, he'll continue to get that momentum in the right direction. I mean, prior to this last game, he had horrible performances against New England and Baltimore. Minnesota really isn't that, difficult of a matchup, but their offense is good enough to keep up and hopefully keep this as a high-scoring contest. Moving on, we have number 7, Aaron Rodgers. Hopefully, Aaron Rodgers will be able to play this week because the fantasy prospects associated in that offense certainly need him, and it was clear that they needed him on the field, whether it was, picking up blitz packages, whether it is calling audibles at the line of scrimmage, making plays with his arm. There's a huge discrepancy of talent right there between Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love, and that is just, it's apparent. And hopefully, he'll be back this week playing against Seattle. I don't even care what Seattle gives up. We're talking about Aaron Rodgers, who has had 7 consecutive games of 2 or more passing touchdowns this season already. I think he'll be fantastic as our number 7. Moving on to number 8, Russell Wilson. Welcome back, Russell Wilson. You actually returned quite sooner than we actually anticipated. Either way, Russell Wilson is trying to get this team back into a playoff picture. He has never missed the playoffs in his entire NFL career. They've never had a losing season since Russell Wilson, joined the Seattle Seahawks. What was it, back in 2012 when he was drafted in the 3rd round? Either way, the whole conversation here is whether or not Russell Wilson is going to be let Russ cook Russell Wilson or, backseat driver. Hopefully, because there isn't much of a running game yet established, we don't know if Chris Carson is going to be there. We don't know what Alex Collins is dealing with in terms of injury. Rashad Penny's been terrible in terms of efficiency. Hopefully, they let this man cook against a secondary that truly needs to be exposed and hasn't been as of the last couple weeks because Patrick Mahomes fell asleep, and so did, of course, Kyler Murray on that Thursday night game. Russell Wilson should be great at number 8. Moving on to number 9, we have Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is coming off of consecutive underwhelming performances, mainly because, again, he hasn't been asked to really score much in garbage time. They've dominated against the Detroit Lions, and they were quite competitive and actually had the lead in the second half late in that game against the Los Angeles Chargers. The Los Angeles Chargers were able to line it up, kick a field goal, no problem, get the game done with. But if we're going to get into a scenario in which the Denver Broncos are going to push them to the limit and give Jalen Hurts the opportunity of going for those garbage time points, by all means, he's coming off of another week in which he had 62 rushing yards. He accompanies that with a rushing touchdown. He's going to have himself a great overall performance, and that is why he is here, because his baseline of value and his floor is so high. The upside is in that 30-point range, which he can absolutely meet any given week. Moving on to our number 10, we have Carson Wentz of the Indianapolis Colts taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars, giving up the 12th most points to opposing quarterbacks. Now, of course, his consistency has been incredible. The offense has been just picking up its stride and killing teams, which is great. First and foremost, Carson Wentz, 6 consecutive games of 2 or more touchdowns. He has also, in the last 3 consecutive games, had 3 touchdowns in every single contest. The momentum is continuing to build. This offense has looked fantastic. The offensive line is fully healthy. They're running the ball very effectively. Pittman has stepped up as a wide receiver 1, and I think Carson Wentz against a division rival like the Jacksonville Jaguars, I don't care what they did to Josh Allen last week. This should be a very easy matchup for Indianapolis and an automatic W. Moving on to Patrick Mahomes, our number 11. You guys were probably waiting for it. Where do I have Patrick Mahomes? Wow, how the mighty have fallen. And it hurts. I don't want to put him here, but I have to. He's coming off of, another 11-point, 10-point week? I mean, he's only scored 2 touchdowns in the last 3 games. How many times are we going to trust it until we can finally see, okay, Patrick Mahomes is back to normal? I'm not willing to risk my entire season for it. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to put him at 11. He plays against the Las Vegas Raiders. In the last, 6 games against the Las Vegas Raiders, Patrick Mahomes-led offenses have scored 35 points per game. So, of course, there's an upside for 5 touchdowns coming up this week. But is it going to happen? I don't know. Because, to be honest, this Raiders defense has looked far better this season, and Patrick Mahomes has looked far less of himself than in years past. Moving on. Matt Ryan's our number 12. Since week 2, Matt Ryan has been unbelievable. In fact, Matt Ryan since week 2 is the number 13 overall quarterback in fantasy. And a lot of people may be thinking, well, no Calvin Ridley, no Julio, Matt Ryan must be in shambles. Well, that's not the case. No Calvin Ridley, no Julio, no problem. That's what Matt Ryan has to say as he has his ice in his veins. He's slinging the rock. He's getting it done. He has 6 games this season of 2 or more touchdowns. Honestly, he's been playing well. He's gotten the ball to Cordero Patterson. He's gotten the ball to Russell Gage. Zach Kesey is getting heavily involved. Of course, we've seen, Kyle Pitts dominate on some of these weeks. I think the matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, giving up the 6th most points to quarterbacks, an easy one. Hopefully, you should be able to fire him up and get a lot of production out of him this week. Moving on to Kirk Cousins. Now listen, Kirk Cousins is a balanced quarterback. Sometimes he has great performance, sometimes he disappears. But luckily for us, Kirk Cousins has always kept games close. He's always in contests, whether it is, I think this season alone, the only games that they've lost by a 1 touchdown, 1 score games. They're going to keep this a competitive one. And if that's going to be the case, they're going to have to, of course, score a lot of points. I know Kubiak, their offensive coordinator, came out and said, we don't want you to go to games and watch Justin Jefferson only catch the ball 3 times and only get 5 targets. We've not done a good enough job getting him targets, which is extremely exciting to hear. Hopefully, we're going to get a lot going in his direction against the Chargers secondary. That is good, but either way, I think Kirk Cousins is a solid enough quarterback to get the job done as our number 13. We move on to Derek Carr. Now, Derek Carr takes on the Kansas City Chiefs. It is the second easiest matchup at the quarterback position, but, he's coming off of a week in which he completely disappeared and wasn't able to move the offense against the Giants. Threw a pick 6. I know that was the game closer, but really, there needs to be more. Hopefully the implementation of a Deshaun Jackson over the top will open up this offense a little bit more. But they can't just trickle down the field. They need that deep play threat that they lost from Henry Ruggs. And that has been something that they really relied upon all season long. As Derek Carr was throwing the ball for over 300 yards every game, and he's pretty much kept on pace there, where he's throwing it for 300 yards every single game on average this season. So if he can accompany that with 2 touchdowns like he has typically every week this season, I think he'll be fantastic and an incredible start for this upcoming week as our number 14. Number 15 is Ryan Tannehill. Despite the fact that Ryan Tannehill didn't have the greatest overall stats, 70% passing completion percentage against the Los Angeles Rams defense, of course, had himself a rushing touchdown and a passing touchdown. Overall, I can't really ask for much more against such a good defense. Now he plays against the Saints. Luckily for him, the Saints, their biggest strength is stopping the run. Well, they don't need to run the ball. They just got to air it out to A.J. Brown, Jeff Swaim, Julio Jones, and let those guys eat. And if, in fact, they're able to do so, Ryan Tannehill will find himself in the end zone eventually, as their defense will give them good field positioning, and it'll all just be history. I think Ryan Tannehill, a solid option as a number 15 as a streamer. Our last streaming option for this upcoming week, I had a couple players in mind. I thought about maybe Trevor Lawrence, maybe Big Ben, maybe Jimmy Garoppolo, but I settled on Teddy Bridgewater coming off of a great week against the Dallas Cowboys secondary. But ultimately, going into this upcoming weekend's game against the Philadelphia Eagles, he's probably not going to look to the side of Darius Slay. And that's not a problem because Jerry Jeudy will sit in the slot, Tim Patrick on the opposite side of the field with Noah Fant running the ball consistently against a relatively easy matchup going into this week for their respective running backs. All they got to do is avoid those 3rd and longs. That is where Teddy Bridgewater, it doesn't really, doesn't mix well there. You got to get him in situations in which we're 3rd and short and he can go ahead and convert. And then we'll continue to trickle down the field, find value there, rack some points, and a great overall play. Thank you, everybody. Those are our top 16 tight end and quarterback rankings for Week 10 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Again, do not forget, tonight, 8:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, as soon as the game finishes for the Baltimore Ravens and Miami Dolphins, I will be live streaming here answering questions. Do not forget that. Outside of that, thank you guys for watching. Subscribe if you have not yet already. Check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code Andrew. The link is down in the description of the video. Until tomorrow, we'll talk about the strength of schedule for the rest of the 2021 fantasy football season. Thank you. Have a nice day. And I'll see you guys. Peace.